What's up? So today I'll be ranking every combat art from Whirlwind Slash all the way to Empowered Mortal Draw. The tier list will be going from Miyazaki, what the fuck, all the way to makes me wanna commit seppuku. Yeah, we'll get into those. When ranking the combat arts, there are three main criteria I'll be basing my ranking on. The first is damage. How much vitality and posture damage does it do, and does it benefit from sword buffs like Divine Confetti, Bestowal, or Living Force, since those can significantly increase the damage potential. The second is utility. Does it bring any situational or positional advantages, or something that makes the combat art more convenient? And the third is price, meaning how many spirit emblems does it cost to perform the combat art, since it has to be useful cause combat arts are competing with ninjutsu techniques and prosthetic tools for your emblems. I was planning on talking about combo potential as well with prosthetic tools, but I thought that would make the video a little too complicated talking about each synergy between the tool and combat art. Plus, most people don't do that playstyle anyway. But if you're interested, I've already made 2 videos talking about the best combo for both the Flame Vent and the Axe Prosthesis, which you can go watch right after this one. So without further ado, let's get into the ranking. So starting out with the combat arts from the Shinobi art skill tree, and there is actually only 2. The first one being Whirlwind Slash. So this is the first combat art you unlock in the game, and when it comes to damage, it actually has pretty decent vitality and posture damage. And it does decent chip damage through blocking. And sword buffs are pretty okay with it since this combat art is pretty spammable. The arcs from the swings gives it a bit of an AoE effect. And if you land the first hit, most enemies will also take the second. And this second hit got a bit of a stagger to it. The art is free, which is good, but overall it's a pretty simple but solid starter combat art, landing it a spot in the C tier. Next up, I actually want to talk about Floating Passage. So you unlock this by going to Hinata State and giving 5 carp skills to the Pot Noble there, and you can actually get it relatively early. It's essentially the upgrade to Whirlwind Slash, now doing 5 consecutive slashes instead of 2, so more damage, but it loses the AoE effect. It's quite spammable, and if the first hit lands, enemies are usually forced to take the full combo. The last hit also has some stagger to it. Because of its many hits, enemies that block take a lot of chip damage, and it also benefits greatly from sword buffs. And still, for no emblems. It looks really cool, and it got some good damage, landing it on a spot in the B tier. Next, let's talk about Shadow Rush. This is the second and last combat art from the Shinobi art skill tree, while also being a keystone combat art. It does respectable vitality damage and it does piercing damage, meaning that it cannot be blocked. And it can be charged for even more damage and range. The hit also staggers really nicely. It allows you to engage from a distance, and the launch up actually allows you to do lightning reversals and dodge sweep attacks, but you kinda have to anticipate them, since its biggest drawback is its long wind up. Because you end in the air, it actually allows you to do a lot of follow-up options. It costs 2 spirit emblems to use, but if you miss, you actually don't lose any emblems. If you're out of emblems, you can still use it to engage, and it will still do piercing damage. Though it doesn't launch you up, meaning you're just sliding on the ground, and it has a really long recovery animation for your character to get up. It actually brings a lot, especially for the point in the game where you can already get it, so earning it a spot in the A tier. And now for the prosthetic arts skill tree, which actually also only contained 2 combat arts, the first one being Nightjar Slash. Damage wise, this is some of the lowest in the entire game, but it got some utility. Since you leap forward, it can be decent at engaging, though the range is kinda mid. Also, because you leap off the ground, you can actually dodge sweep attacks, but not lightning reversals, since you're too low to the ground to actually perform the counter attack. It is relatively spammable, and it costs 0 emblems, so there's that. But overall, Nightjar Slash is really weak and kinda disappointing, so I have to put it in makes me wanna commit seppuku tier. Sorry Nightjar Slash. And the last combat art from the prosthetic art skill tree is Nightjar Slash Reversal. So this is literally a straight up upgrade to Nightjar Slash, adding a reversal attack option. It still got weak damage, but has the utility of dodging sweep attacks and engaging. But this new reversal attack actually allows you to do damage while disengaging, and this is actually pretty good. It's great for resetting to heal or even dodging attacks, and it still doesn't cost any emblems. Overall, the finesse and control you can have over a battle with this combat art makes it miles better than Nightjar Slash. So Nightjar Slash Reversal gets a B tier. Now for the Ashina art skill tree, where we got 3 combat arts. The first one being Ichimonji. It does some good damage, especially posture damage, and it staggers really nicely. It also recovers your own posture, even if you miss. And this is actually really good. It can actually be charged, but you would rarely do that, especially because it already has a little bit of a slow wind-up, but that can be negated by doing a jump attack. Also, it doesn't cost any emblems. This is probably the strongest of all the true early game arts, therefore landing itself in the S tier. Next up, Ichimonji Double. So you would have never guessed it by its name, but this is Ichimonji, but with a double attack. It's the upgraded version, offering now even more damage, even more stagger, and even more posture recovery. It still is a little slow, but by jumping again, you can negate this. And also still for 0 emblems. For a free art, this is just so good and it can carry you through a lot of the game. I know it's good. You know it's good. My mom probably even know it's good. I gotta put this one in Miyazaki what the fuck tier. Moving on to Ashina Cross. So this is actually the keystone art of the Ashina art skill tree. And it's kinda bad. Kinda. So it actually got some good damage, especially vitality damage. It also has a little range from the forward dash and it staggers quite nicely. But you enter a sheeted stance with your katana, which has a really long wind up. The stance can be an advantage preparing for an attack or engaging in a small opening. But most of the time, it's not. When you are in the stance, the attack does come out pretty fast, and if one hit lands, you usually land both slashes. It costs 2 spirit emblems, and even without emblems, it's actually decent, you just lose a bit of the damage. But for a combat art in the mid game that essentially only offers damage, it just can't compete. Landing it a spot in the C tier. Now for the temple art skill tree, where we got 4 combat arts to talk about. The first one being Praying Strikes. So you straight up says screw the katana and just start punching and elbowing your enemies. It actually does solid posture damage, but it does the lowest vitality in the game. It's essentially none. This is fine against weaker enemies, but stronger enemies, mini-bosses and bosses, you need to lower their vitality before you can actually kill them, cause their posture recovery is just so fast. It does come out quite fast, making it really spammable, and it got some decent stagger to it. But it doesn't really have any range, and because you're not using your katana, it's unaffected by sword buffs. It is free though, but for early to mid-game combat art, there are just better options. So unfortunately, I gotta put Praying Strikes in the makes me wanna commit seppuku tier. Yeah. The next one is Praying Strike Exorcism. So lo and behold, they made an upgrade to Praying Strikes. So they added a shoulder bump to the end of this combo, and this shoulder bump actually does a lot of posture damage, a little vitality damage, and really good stagger. You can now charge the combat art to only do the shoulder bump, and you get some good range with it actually. But it still has the same problems as Praying Strikes. It still has relatively low vitality damage, it doesn't benefit from sword buffs, the range isn't that good if you don't charge it, and it has no utility. Though it is still free and spammable. It's like putting a pretty bow on a bag of trash. It's still bad, but it's better. So Praying Strike Exorcism gets a C tier. Now let's talk about Senpo Leaping Kick. So this combat art does good posture damage, but a little low vitality damage. And it doesn't use the katana, meaning it's unaffected by sword buffs. For mid-game art, this should be bad, no? Well, what it lacks in damage, it brings in convenience and utility. So it's good to engage with, and you can easily close the distance since you leap kinda far. And because you leap into the air, you can do lightning reversals and dodge sweep attacks. Also often just dodge normal attacks. And the initial kick has a bit of a stagger to it, and for 0 emblems. This combat art is so convenient, so I gotta put it in the B tier. Lastly, on the temple art skill tree is the keystone art High Monk. So this is a direct upgrade to Senpo Leaping Kick, adding 2 sword swings and a final spin kick in the end of the combo. It has the same utility benefits as Senpo Leaping Kick. Dodging attacks, sweep attacks, lightning reversals, and being able to engage from a solid distance. Now that it has 2 sword swings, it actually benefits from sword buffs, though it's very little, so I wouldn't recommend using it with it. While High Monk makes this combo do more damage and even more stagger. And now because of the 2 sword swings, it got some more vitality damage. Because the combo is so long, that means you can stun lock some enemies, but stronger enemies sometimes will just power through the combo, making it hard to get the full combo off. But overall, utility wise, this is an absolute staple, so I gotta put it in the A tier. So when you finish exploring the Senpo temple location, you get the Mortal Blade. This blade allows you to do a new combat art called Mortal Draw. Its damage is some of the best in the entire game, with good chip damage, and it can stagger almost everything. Because of the large swings and the missed effects, it gets a bit of an AoE and some range too. Though the drawback is that it has a bit of a wind up, and that it costs 3 spirit emblems per swing, and the full combo is 2 swings, so 6 spirit emblems. That is pricey, but it is worth it for the incredible damage this brings. It can also be used without spirit emblems, you just lose a chunk of damage and a chunk of range. And for some reason, and I feel like it's not supposed to be like that, it does as much damage if you do a jump attack as the empowered Mortal Draw, which is the upgraded version we'll talk about after. And being able to jump in with this combat art, you save a bit of time with the wind up, but you're doing even more damage. So it's kind of ridiculous actually. Mortal Draw is an absolute powerhouse, so I gotta put it in the S tier. Next up, we're gonna talk about the combat arts from the Mushin art skill tree. And these are the true late game combat arts, requiring having unlocked multiple previous arts and skills to get these. So as promised, let's start out with Empowered Mortal Draw. So to get this, you must first have unlocked the Mortal Blade, so Mortal Draw, and the Keystone skill, Living Force, and the Keystone combat art, Ashina Cross. It's essentially the same as Mortal Draw, but you can now charge it for even more damage and range. And if you do a jump attack, it does as much damage as the fully charged version. Note that it does less damage from afar, since the damage is split up to 2 parts, one from the sword and the other from the mist effect. Also, Mortal Draw and Empowered Mortal Draw doesn't benefit from sword buffs, since you're using the Mortal Blade. It still costs 3 to 6 emblems, and without emblems it's also still good. And it can actually still be charged without emblems for a little more range. It has the same drawbacks as Mortal Draw, being kinda slow with the wind up and also not really having much utility, since this is just meant to be an absolute atomic bomb. Also note that you lose Mortal Draw and Empowered Mortal Draw when going into New Game Plus until you have required the Mortal Blade at the Senpo Temple again. So all in all, Empowered Mortal Draw is the hardest hitting combat art in the entire game, and it hits like an absolute truck. So I have to put it in the Miyazaki what the fuck tier. Next, let's talk about Shadowfall. This is essentially the upgrade to Shadow Rush. And to get it, you must have unlocked Shadow Rush and High Monk. Where Shadow Rush leaves you hanging in the air after landing the initial hit to do whatever follow-up you want, Shadowfall automatically has a built-in best in slot follow-up option. It's a 2-hit follow-up that actually has a tiny bit of AoE to it. It can still do lightning reversals and dodge sweep attacks, but it's still hard. And it's even better now at engaging, because it has even more damage and more stagger. And it's still doing piercing damage, so it bypasses blocks. And this can also be charged for more range and more damage. But it still has the same drawback of having a little long of a wind up. Shadowfall still costs 2 emblems, so that's good. And it can still be used without emblems, though with the long recovery time from getting off the ground, since you're not being launched up. Also, something to note is that both Shadow Rush and Shadowfall will get Makiri countered against the boss Owl. But overall, this is a really strong combo with good vitality damage and initiating capabilities, so I gotta put it in the S tier. Now for the last of the Mushin art combat arts, Spiral Cloud Passage. This is one of my favorite combat arts. To unlock it, it requires you having Floating Passage from the Pot Noble and the Keystone art Shadow Rush, and also the Keystone art Ashina Cross. It's kinda like the first evolution last in line from Whirlwind Slash to Floating Passage to Spiral Cloud Passage. It adds 4 more hits from Floating Passage, now being a 9-hit combo, and a huge AoE effect. The AoE effect cannot be blocked, but it also don't interrupt attacks. This full combo does some really great damage, especially chip damage. But it seems to me the stagger is not too crazy except for the last hit. Enemies that block usually tends to take the full combo because the flurry of slashes. This insane amount of attacks also make sword buffs best put on this combat art, especially on normal enemies that get 1 proc by the burn status from just 1 slash. It also comes out quite fast, making it really spammable, and all for 3 emblems. The 3 emblem cost is kinda split up, so you pay 1 emblem for the first slash, the next for the 5th, and the last for the 9th. Meaning that if you get interrupted, you don't necessarily lose 3 emblems immediately. If you do run out of emblems though, it just becomes an upgraded version of Floating Passage with 4 extra hits. Just like the Mortal Draws, this is a late game combat art that doesn't have too much utility, but is a damage machine. And because of Spiral Cloud's insanely high damage potential with sword buffs, I gotta put it in the S tier. So there are actually 3 post-game combat arts that you can unlock as well. The first one being Dragon Flash. It's unlocked by getting any ending that isn't the Shura ending. It's the only actual long-range combat art in the game, and it actually does good posture and vitality damage. It can be charged, and you often want to do it since it adds another hit to the combo, meaning even more damage and more stagger. This second hit is a wave of shock waves, meaning that bigger targets actually takes more damage from this, since more of the wave will hit. Dragon Flash does more damage up close, since you also hit with the physical sword. And the shockwave effect cannot be blocked. Something to note is that sword buffs only affect the initial swing and not the shockwave. Dragon Flash has some ridiculous long range, and all for only 2 emblems. It can actually still be used without emblems, but you lose the long range part of the attack, which is a good amount of the damage, making this basically useless, so do not use it without emblems. The utility from Dragon Flash being a long range combat art is actually wild, making it so you can snipe most mobs from a distance, and against bosses you don't even have to get in close to engage with them, because you can literally damage bosses from the other side of the arena. This utility brings Dragon Flash to an S tier. So if you choose to go with the Shura ending, you actually get a different combat art, being One Mind. This is another one of my personal favorites, and by the way it functions, it kinda seems to be like an upgrade to Ashina Cross. It does some really good damage and a lot of chip damage too, plus it got some great stagger. The second part of the attack, the Sphere of Slashes, is actually unblockable, but that part of the attack is unfortunately also not affected by sword buffs, meaning only the first and second slash is affected, making sword buffs kinda bad on this combat art, even though it does so many hits. This Sphere of Slashes give it somewhat of an AoE, especially with the third big slash, though the first and third slash have a bit of a dash to it, giving it some range, though it isn't that much. It has the same interesting sheathing animation as Ashina Cross, making it both good at preparing an attack and engaging suddenly, but it gives it the long wind-up, which is often a bigger disability than an advantage. One Mind costs 3 Spirit Emblems to use, which is okay for the damage, though it can still be used without Spirit Emblems. But you're losing the Flurry of Slashes, the middle part of the attack, while still doing the animation where you're sitting on your knees waiting for the attacks to come, but it's just not there, giving you an insanely long recovery till you can perform the big last third slash. So this is arguably one of the, if not the worst, combat art to use without emblems. It's a cool combat art, especially for the late game, with good damage, some utility but also a lot of downside to it, but it mostly just brings damage, meaning unfortunately I have to put One Mind in the A tier. And now for the last combat art, but certainly not least, is Sakura Dance. So after completing the game once, you unlock something called Gauntlets of Strengths, which are boss run challenges that gives you different rewards, and one of these is Sakura Dance. So getting it is a bit of a skill check. The combat art have decent vitality damage and decent posture damage, and some decent chip damage, and some decent stagger. So for a late game, potentially even the last combat art of the game, this doesn't sound too great, right? But where it excels is in its utility. Because it's a fast free hit combo, it actually makes it really good for sword buffs. And each of these swings have a huge arc, giving it somewhat of an AoE too. Because you leap so high in the air on the initial slash, it makes lightning reversals and sweep attacks a freaking breeze. And you often also just dodge random attacks because you're going that high. Sakura Dance actually finishes in the air even after lightning reversals, meaning that you can do some combos to follow up with more damage. Sakura Dance is also really spammable. And all of this utility you get at an amazing price of only one Spirit Emblem. That is insane. Even without Spirit Emblems, it's solid, though you lose a lot of the damage and the AoE effect, but you still get all the utility from being launched up into the air. All in all, Sakura Dance is a beautiful combat art, meaning that I have to put it in the Miyazaki what the fuck tier. So while gathering clips, I realized that you actually can use some of the combat arts to do anti-air death blows. This could bring more utility to some of the combat arts. And there are a couple contenders. The first being Nightjar Slash and Nightjar Slash Reversal, but they're unfortunately too low to the ground to be able to perform it. Next up, Shadow Rush, Shadow Fall and Sakura Dance, which unfortunately also don't work since the initial attack hits the enemy, knocking them out of the air. So the only combat arts that actually benefit from this new discovery is Senpo Leaping Kick and High Monk, since you don't hit the enemy as soon as you go into the air. And you go high enough to actually trigger the anti-air death blow mechanic. But unfortunately, the enemies where you actually can do anti-air death blows are so few and far in between that it doesn't really change the rankings. If I were to put the individual tiers in order from best to worst, it would look like this. But remember, this tier list is objective truth, and do take it personally if I rank your favorite combat art poorly. But you can plead your case to me in the comments and I would love to hear your guys' take. This video took a ridiculous amount of time to create, both with the scripting, the editing, and especially getting good clips for each combat art. Plus, while I was halfway in, I lost it all because of my CapCut just crashing out. So if you did enjoy the video, please leave a like and subscribe for more content like this. Anyways, I've been Reyes Tarnished, and I'll see you all in the next one.